This is Deep Blue, one of the largest white sharks ever captured on film. But after stunning the world back in 2014, bar a single confirmed sighting in Hawaii, she vanished without a trace. This giant shark, estimated to be around 20 foot long and thought to be over 50 years old, is one of the most famous white sharks ever documented. Her sheer size, relatively calm demeanor, and sporadic encounters down the years has puzzled scientists and captivated millions of people around the world. But then she just disappeared. No confirmed sightings or clear answers about where she went, just questions. Namely, where did she go? Is she still out there roaming the depths? And importantly, will she ever be seen again? Today then, we're diving into the story of Deep Blue and her incredible encounters. We'll be looking into the science behind tracking and observing massive sharks like her. And by the end of this video, using the most up-to-date scientific research, we'll try and pinpoint precisely where we might see her next. Welcome back to another Shark Bites episode, everyone. Now, before we home in on some of her more famous sightings down the years, we've got to go back to the start, all the way to 1999. Cage diving in Guadalupe, Mexico was very much in its infancy, with just a few lucky divers plunging into the chilly waters of this remote volcanic island. Post-millennium, the site would quickly explode into a world-renowned shark diving tourism hotspot, hosting thousands of scuba divers every year between July and November. Early in the Guadalupe dive season, around July and August, you'll get your slightly smaller male white sharks showing up, but as the months go by into late September and October, the big adult females join the party. These larger females end up coming a bit later in the season because they're in the process of their 2-year breeding cycle, in which they spend the majority of their time in offshore pelagic waters before a brief 2-month stop in Baja to give birth to their pups, which means their return to the aggregation site ends up getting a bit delayed compared to those smaller males. Anyway, back in the late 1990s, shark scientist Dr. Michael Domier and underwater photographer Steve Drogan first documented Deep Blue off Guadalupe in late September. We don't have any video footage of her from this time, but we do have pictures of her found in the Guadalupe Island White Shark Photo ID book. At the time, Michael believed her to be a big individual, but didn't manage to estimate her size precisely. And it is tough to say from the photographs, but there's a good chance that she was already a 16-foot shark back then. But other than the photo taken by Steve, we didn't get any video footage or more photographs of her here for several years, although she was seen by divers and tour operators periodically on the island every few years, which would be consistent with that biennial breeding cycle. Back in 2013, though, was when Deep Blue's notoriety exploded. The original video, filmed by Mike Bolton, which many people thought was filmed by Mauricio Hoyos Padilla, myself included, showed her insane size compared to the dive cages and the divers in those cages. This footage here had to likely initially be kept under wraps because the Discovery Channel were filming a few Shark Week episodes at the time, namely Island of the Mega Shark and Jaws Strikes Back, in which Deep Blue features heavily. In the latter show, which aired in 2014, shark scientist Greg Scommel and his team ended up tagging Deep Blue a few times with a short-term tracking device and camera. The tag allowed Scommel's autonomous underwater vehicle, Remus, to zero in on Deep Blue and find out exactly what she was doing in Guadalupe's depths. And they even ended up writing a scientific research paper about it, published in 2015, that highlighted some amazing footage and interesting hunting behaviors from several large white sharks in the area, including Deep Blue. The footage Scommel and his team got from their boat cameras and the Remus shark cam ended up providing us with some of our first real identifying features that scientists still use today to pick her out from a crowd. The first feature, and probably the best one for an ID, is a black spot on her right gill slit that sits slightly higher up, just between her first and second gill slit. And then the second feature is a distinctive notch out of the trailing edge of her dorsal fin. If we compare this to the original photos of Deep Blue in the Guadalupe Shark ID book, we can see that back then, when she was photographed, she didn't have that notch in the dorsal, but she definitely has the dark blotch on her gill slits. The gill slit one and the dorsal fin will always be the two best identifying features for Deep Blue, though, because they're unlikely to change as she gets older. But some people have occasionally used some other scars on her body to ID her in the past as well, namely 3 vertical slashes on her left flank and then an oval-shaped scar on her right flank. Scars like this generally aren't the best identifying feature because there's the chance that they can change or even completely disappear as they heal, but in the short term they can be used sparingly. Now, after Mike Bolton's crazy footage was released post-Shark Week embargo, many people continued to share it over the next few years, which did lead to a bit of confusion about where and when she was being sighted, because people were just sharing multiple clips left, right, and center. But it was 5 years later, in 2019, when Deep Blue achieved her almost mythical status in the shark fandom world. A floating sperm whale carcass off the coast of Oahu in Hawaii rang the proverbial white shark dinner bell, and a number of large individuals in the area were drawn in by that scent, one of whom again was deep blue. On this occasion, underwater photographer Mark Moeller filmed and photographed deep blue with marine biologist Andrew Gray and photographer Kim Jeffries in the frame. And based on some of the footage taken by Mark, we can see again the clear blotch on the right gill slits and that definite notch out of the dorsal fin. This is 100% deep blue. But that sighting off Oahu in Hawaii was our last confirmed sighting that we have of her. Mike Bolton has since said on Instagram that he has seen deep blue again in Guadalupe a few years after the Hawaii sighting in 2021, although there isn't any video or photo evidence available online to confirm it. But even if Mike's sighting was legitimate, that's still over 5 years without a confirmed sighting. So it begs the question, how can an animal the size of deep blue just completely disappear off the face of the earth for years on end, and as of currently, indefinitely? And to answer that question, we're going to have to dive deep into Pacific white shark ecology. First up though, I think it's probably worth pointing out just how big the Pacific Ocean is. This ocean basin is by far the largest and deepest ocean on planet Earth. Spanning an area of over 60 million square miles, it accounts for around a third of the Earth's surface area. To put that into perspective, the Pacific is so large that you can fit the entire combined land area of all 7 continents within it. That's just bonkers. So even though deep blue is perhaps one of the largest white sharks ever caught on film, it's still kind of like searching for a needle in amongst 1,000 haystacks. But despite great white sharks being well known for their mega migrations of tens of thousands of miles, our search area here doesn't have to be the entire Pacific Ocean. Because we know that eastern Pacific white sharks are using certain areas of this ocean quite habitually, and the best place to start would be where deep blue has been seen the most, and that's Guadalupe. Being first sighted here in the late 90s and having some sporadic sightings for over a decade after that point, there's a good chance that if we're going to find deep blue again, it'll be here. Guadalupe is a favoured foraging aggregation for large Pacific white sharks who feed on the energy-rich seals that inhabit the island. An elephant seal is undoubtedly the kind of meal that can sustain a 20-foot white shark for a decent period of time. But currently, there's a bit of an obstacle here. In 2022, the Mexican government temporarily suspended all white shark diving activities off Guadalupe, and as of January 2023, that ban was made permanent. This ban encompassed scuba diving cage tour operators, but also included the banning of commercial filmmaking as well, which probably took out, half of Shark Week's TV shows? The Mexican government reported that the ban was enacted to try and prevent interference with the shark's behavior and feeding patterns after a few high-profile incidents where individual sharks actually ended up getting injured or even killed by those dive cages. Critics of this argued that these incidents were actually rare and posed their concerns that the closure of the biosphere reserve could lead to unmonitored illegal fishing in the region, which would threaten that shark population. I have started hearing some rumblings though that Guadalupe might end up reopening later this year, although as of currently that could just be a rumour and I've got no concrete evidence for you all. As it stands, Guadalupe remains closed for pretty much everyone, which means that if deep blue was being seen there every couple of years, there wouldn't be many, if any, people to witness her. But even though this remote volcanic island is clearly a favoured destination for deep blue for about a third of the year, it's not the only place we might be able to find her. White sharks in the eastern Pacific are well known for spending more than half of the year in offshore pelagic habitats, and about 20% of the sharks that have been tagged here show evidence that they like to occasionally visit Hawaii. Although white sharks have been sighted at different times of the year in Hawaii, there does seem to be a pattern that highlights the winter months as a particular time of year that you're more likely to see a white shark in this part of the world. This time of year coincides with the annual migration of whales in the region, so the white sharks that venture to Hawaii are likely on the search for any dead whale carcasses that are drifting around. And that's exactly what deep blue was doing the last time she was sighted in 2019 by Mark Moeller in Hawaii. She was drawn in by a floating whale carcass. So she clearly knows this area and knows what great foraging opportunities are occasionally presented here. So there's always a chance that if Hawaii ends up with another floating whale carcass, that deep blue might not be too far behind. Some of you might be asking at this point though, if only 20% of the white sharks that have been tagged here end up going to Hawaii, then where do the other 80% of them go? Looking at this satellite tracking figure here from a study by Dr. Salvador Jorgensen, you can see there's a few tracks hovering around Hawaii over here, although most of the tracks on this figure are centered in a midway point between the Californian mainland and Hawaii, which is of course the White Shark Cafe. During the Second World War, human advancements in sonar technologies ended up revealing a layer in the ocean that was scattering that sonar. Back then, this ocean layer was actually mistaken for the seabed, but it wasn't until they realized that this apparent seabed was rising up to the surface during the night and then falling back down again in the day that it couldn't possibly be the seabed at all. Scientists would later go on to discover that this was in fact millions of tiny marine creatures like fish, squid, and jellyfish performing a vertical diel migration up and down the water column. And it was given the official name the deep scattering layer, one of the largest animal migrations on Earth. The idea here is that these animals rise towards the surface at night to feed, and then during the day sink back down to the depths to avoid predators. But the problem for some of these small fish and squid, though, is that many marine predators have actually evolved adaptations to allow them to follow this energy-rich food source down into the deep. And one of these predators that are able to do this is, of course, the eastern Pacific white shark. Of the white sharks frequenting the cafe that have been tagged, we can see them performing an oscillatory diving behavior, which are those black lines moving up and down, predominantly hovering somewhere between 200 and 400 meters. Exactly where the deep scattering layer likes to hang out during the day. So there's a good chance that Deep Blue might be utilizing this offshore pelagic foraging area to feed for long periods of the year. It's a pretty large area though, spanning over 160 miles, which means that trying to find her here would be almost impossible. But if we have a quick look at the spatial distribution split between males and females who use the cafe, there's something really interesting going on. Male white sharks during this offshore period, shown as yellow dots, are quite clearly aggregating in a much more confined central area of the cafe, whereas the females are generally distributed in the more western sections of the cafe and beyond over towards Hawaii. The segregation between the sexes likely isn't accidental though, and perhaps means there's something more going on here other than just feeding. I'd say this distribution that we're looking at here would suggest that there's potentially mating going on here too. So the females are sticking over to the west, mostly away from all the males, to try and manage the violent nature of white shark mating. Because I can't imagine it's exactly easy to forage efficiently when you're getting bitten to shreds by pesky males trying to mate with you. So I'd say this narrows down our potential search area for Deep Blue quite considerably. Between the months of January and June, there's a decent chance she's utilizing the waters in the western section of the White Shark Cafe or Hawaii. And then as we move towards the latter half of the year, she could be hanging out just offshore of California, or perhaps more likely for Deep Blue, Guadalupe Island. Although actually finding her here is easier said than done, because this search zone is still a huge area and you're relying on people being out on the water to just randomly come across her. Now there is a scenario here that up until this point I haven't discussed because it's a bit morbid, but it is a very real possibility, and that is that after all this time, the best part of 5 or 6 years, Deep Blue might no longer be alive anymore. There is a decent amount of fishing pressure in this part of the world, mostly from pelagic longline fisheries targeting tuna, swordfish, and some pelagic sharks. Fortunately for Deep Blue though, recent research in 2026 has shown the actual intensity of fishing effort for this fishery is relatively low in the areas more commonly used by the white sharks here. The most intensely fished areas, seen in yellow and red, don't tend to overlap with the White Shark Cafe and its peripheries, which are the red circle and the dashed red square. There is perhaps a bit more crossover with the deep set hooks, but even with that overlap, fishing pressure here is relatively low compared to the waters just north of Hawaii. That's not to say that white sharks aren't at risk here. Those little white squares you can see on both of those maps are incidents where white sharks have ended up being caught as bycatch. So clearly then it does happen, but fortunately not in the areas most commonly used by the sharks themselves. So where is Deep Blue? Well, that's a question that as of currently, I don't have a definitive answer for you all. Looking at it scientifically, I think if we are going to see her again, it'll be in Hawaii for the first half of the year and then Guadalupe in the second half of the year. But for now, we can only hope that she's somewhere out there in the vastness of the Pacific Ocean just doing her thing, and I really do hope that's the case. Do you guys reckon we'll be seeing Deep Blue again anytime soon? And if we do, where do you think it'll be? I want to hear all your thoughts in the comments. But before you all shoot off, if you enjoyed learning about this massive great white shark today, then I think you might quite enjoy this video here. In it, we look at the supposed giant white sharks of the Mediterranean, some of which have mythical size estimates. But are the sharks in this part of the world really that big? Well, if you want to know the answer to that question, make sure you give this video a click.